Since some of you did not like to hear what I said about this video right here, I wanted to make this video to show you that what you hear is not always the truth. Now, when we talk about the Bible, millions of people believe these stories are 100% real. But what if I told you that some of these characters might have been completely made up? I know, sounds crazy, right? But stick with me, because the evidence behind this is wild. By the way, I upload videos every week. So, if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss a thing. Alright, so you know Adam and Eve. These two are literally the first humans in the Bible, the blueprint for all of humanity. Their story is legendary. God creates Adam from dust, then makes Eve from his rib, and boom, paradise. They're chilling in the Garden of Eden, living their best lives. No work, no stress, no bills, just them, nature, and a talking snake. Yeah, you know where this is going. Everything's perfect until that one rule gets broken. God tells them, look, you can eat from any tree in the garden, but don't touch the fruit from this one tree. And you know what happens next? The snake rolls up, smooth talks Eve, and convinces her that the fruit is actually the best thing ever. She takes a bite, gives some to Adam, and just like that, they've messed up. Suddenly, they realize they're naked, they freak out, and when God comes looking for them, they're hiding behind some bushes like guilty kids who just broke a lamp. And by the looks of it, God is not happy. He kicks them out of paradise, curses them with pain, hard labor, and basically tells them, yeah, life's gonna be a struggle now. And that's how sin, suffering, and humanity as we know it all began, at least according to the Bible. Now, here's the big question. Were Adam and Eve actual people? Or is this just a symbolic origin story? Well, let's be real. There's zero historical or scientific evidence that a literal Adam and Eve existed. No ancient records, no fossils, no traces of a single first human couple. And the idea that all of humanity came from just two people? That doesn't line up with what we know about genetics and evolution. Scientists have studied human DNA, and they've found that humans didn't come from just one couple, but rather from a large population that existed over thousands of years. If Adam and Eve were the only humans at the beginning, we would have experienced significantly higher levels of genetic similarity within the population. That being said, the story of Adam and Eve isn't necessarily about science or history. A lot of scholars believe it's a symbolic tale meant to explain deep questions, like why humans make mistakes, why life is hard, and why we have this weird mix of good and evil inside us. And honestly, whether you believe in the story literally or not, it's kind of genius. Instead of a boring explanation about genetics and evolution, you get this dramatic, emotional story about temptation, consequences, and what it means to be human. Okay, now we're talking about one of the most famous survival stories of all time, Noah and the Great Flood. You know the deal. The world is full of sin, people are acting wild, and God is done with it. So, he decides to hit the reset button and flood the entire planet. But lucky for humanity, there's one guy who's actually righteous, and that's Noah. So, God gives Noah, the 600-year-old man, the ultimate construction project. Build a massive ark. And we're not talking about some little fishing boat. This thing is huge. God tells him to bring 2 of every animal, load up his family, and wait for the storm. Then, boom, it starts raining, and it doesn't stop. The floodwaters rise, wiping out everything. Humanity, gone. Cities, gone. The only survivors? Noah, his family, and a boat full of animals. After 40 days and 40 nights, the rain finally stops, and the ark comes to rest on Mount Ararat. Noah sends out a dove. It comes back with an olive branch, and that's when he knows. Land is finally dry. Then, God makes a promise, puts a rainbow in the sky, and tells Noah, I won't do that again. It's an epic story. But the real question is, did it actually happen? Well, let's start with the flood itself. A worldwide flood that covered everything? Scientists say there's no evidence for that. If a flood that massive had happened, we'd see it in geological records. Layers of sediment, ancient flood deposits, something. But we don't. And then there's the animal problem. 2 of every species? On a single boat? For over a year? That's millions of animals, and somehow Noah and his family managed to feed them, clean up after them, and keep them from eating each other? Yeah, logistically, that doesn't really check out. But here's where things get interesting. While there's no evidence for a global flood, a lot of ancient cultures have flood myths. The Sumerians, Babylonians, even the Greeks. They all have stories about a massive flood that wiped out civilization. And historians believe this could be based on a real event, just on a smaller scale. Some theories suggest that a massive regional flood may have happened in the ancient Middle East, possibly around the Black Sea or the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and over time the story got bigger and bigger until it became the legend of Noah's Ark. As for Noah himself, there's no historical evidence that he was a real person. His story is similar to an older Babylonian myth, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which tells of a man named Utnapishtim, who also built a giant boat, survived a great flood, and released birds to find land. Sounds familiar, right? It's possible that the biblical flood story was inspired by older legends that got adapted into the version we know today. So, did Noah exist? Probably not. Did a great flood happen exactly as described in the Bible? Also unlikely. But was there some kind of big flood that inspired these ancient myths? Maybe. And either way, Noah's story has survived for thousands of years, making it one of the most famous tales in history. Alright, now it's time for a character who might just be the most unlucky guy in the entire Bible. His name is Job. So, Job's story is a wild one. If you don't remember, he's the guy who basically had the worst luck of all time. He was super rich, had a big family, and was living his best life. Until one day, God and Satan made a bet. Yeah, you heard that right. In the story, Satan rolls up to heaven and God's like, "Hey, have you seen my guy Job? He's the most loyal, faithful person ever." And Satan, he's not buying it. He goes, "Yeah, of course he's loyal. His life is perfect. Take everything away from him, and I bet he'll curse you." And God, instead of shutting that down, is like, "All right, deal." And just like that, Job's life goes straight to hell. His wealth, gone. His livestock, gone. His house, destroyed. His kids. And as if that wasn't enough, he gets covered in painful sores and ends up sitting in ashes, scraping his skin with a broken piece of pottery. Yeah, talk about a bad day. Now, here's the question. Was Job a real person, or was he just a character in an ancient story? Well, the book of Job is one of the oldest books in the Bible, but scholars say there's no evidence that Job was ever a real person. In fact, most of them believe his story is a work of wisdom literature, basically a super dramatic poem written to explore big questions about suffering and faith. And when you actually look at how the book is written, it makes sense. The beginning and the end of Job's story are in prose, like a regular story, but the middle? It's all highly structured poetry with deep philosophical debates. That's a pretty big clue that Job wasn't an actual guy, but more of a literary creation meant to teach a lesson. And there's more. The numbers in Job's story feel symbolic. He has 7 sons and 3 daughters, and after everything is over, he gets back double of everything he lost. That's the kind of perfect number pattern you see in myths, not in real-life history. And let's not forget the heavenly council scene, where God and Satan are literally making bets like they're at a casino. That kind of scene doesn't really show up in historical records. It's more like something you'd find in ancient storytelling. So, what's the takeaway? Well, even though Job probably wasn't a real person, his story is still one of the most powerful ones in the Bible. It's all about why bad things happen to good people, and whether faith is still worth it when everything falls apart. Now we're getting into the big leagues. We've talked about some major biblical figures so far, but now it's time for the main event, Moses. If the Bible had an A-list celebrity, this guy would be right at the top. He's the one who confronted Pharaoh, unleashed the 10 plagues, parted the Red Sea, led the Israelites out of Egypt, and got the 10 commandments straight from God. I mean, that's legendary status right there. But here's the big question. Did Moses actually exist? So let's start with what the Bible says. According to the story, Moses was born in Egypt at a time when Pharaoh had ordered all Hebrew baby boys to be unalived. His mother, desperate to save him, puts him in a basket and sends him floating down the Nile River. And by some crazy twist of fate, Pharaoh's daughter finds him, adopts him, and raises him as Egyptian royalty. But as Moses gets older, he finds out he's actually Hebrew, and after unaliving an Egyptian overseer, he flees to the desert. Fast forward, and Moses is chilling in the wilderness when a burning bush starts talking to him. It's God, and he's got a mission. Go back to Egypt and demand the release of the Israelites. Moses isn't too thrilled about the idea, but he goes anyway, and that's when things get wild. The 10 plagues hit Egypt, rivers turning to blood, swarms of locusts, hailstorms, darkness, and the grand finale, the expiration of every firstborn Egyptian. Pharaoh finally gives in, and Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. But just as they're leaving, Pharaoh changes his mind and sends his army after them. And that's when we get the most epic moment in the story. Moses raises his staff, the Red Sea parts, the Israelites cross safely, and when Pharaoh's army follows, the sea crashes down and wipes them out. That's already a mind-blowing story, but it doesn't stop there. Moses then leads the Israelites through the wilderness for 40 years, receives the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, and eventually dies before reaching the Promised Land. Now, all of that sounds amazing, but did it actually happen? Here's where things get messy. First off, there's no historical or archaeological evidence of Moses. And this isn't just a small detail, we're talking about a story that involves millions of people supposedly wandering the desert for 40 years. If that actually happened, we'd expect to find some kind of evidence. Campfire remains, tools, bones, pottery, but so far, nothing. Then there's the issue of the Exodus itself. The Bible says that 600,000 Israelite men left Egypt, which would mean over 2 million people total when you include women and children. But here's the problem. Egyptian records never mention this. And trust me, the Egyptians wrote everything down. They recorded their wars, plagues, famines, and even minor battles, but somehow they forgot to mention losing millions of slaves overnight. That would have been one of the biggest events in their history, but there's no record of it anywhere. And let's talk about the parting of the Red Sea. Now, some people try to explain it scientifically, saying maybe it was a tidal event, strong winds, or even a volcanic eruption. But there's no solid evidence that anything like this happened during the supposed time of Moses. So, does this mean Moses was completely made up? Not necessarily. Some scholars think that Moses could have been based on a real person, or maybe even a combination of multiple leaders who helped a smaller group of Israelites escape Egypt. There's a theory that instead of a single massive exodus, smaller groups of Semitic people gradually left Egypt over time, and later, their stories got merged into one grand narrative. It's also possible that the story was heavily exaggerated over time to create a powerful national origin myth for the Israelites. So, was there a real Moses? Maybe. But not in the way the Bible describes him. Was there a massive exodus with millions of people? Probably not. Now we're getting into a story that's part royal drama, part undercover mission, and part fairy tale, the story of Esther. If this were a movie, it would be a mix of Game of Thrones, Ocean's 11, and Cinderella, all rolled into one. But the real question is, did it actually happen? So, here's how it goes. Esther is a Jewish woman living in Persia, and somehow she ends up becoming queen. Yeah, not bad, right? But here's the catch. She keeps her Jewish identity a secret. See, the king, Ahasuerus, who most historians believe is actually Xerxes I, is running the show. But his right-hand man, Haman, is a total villain. This guy hates the Jews and comes up with a plan to wipe them out completely. And when Esther's cousin Mordecai refuses to bow to him, Haman loses it and convinces the king to sign an order that will basically lead to a mass genocide. Now, Esther has a serious choice to make. She can stay quiet and save herself, or she can risk everything to stop this from happening. And back in those days, walking into the king's court without being invited was a one-way ticket to execution. But Esther doesn't care. She puts on her royal robes, walks straight into the throne room, and somehow doesn't get unalived. Instead, the king actually listens to her. She throws a huge banquet, exposes Haman's evil plan, and flips the whole situation around. And Haman? He was executed. The Jews? Saved? And Esther? Becomes a legendary hero. Now, that's an amazing story, but did it actually happen? Well, here's where things get a little tricky. The book of Esther is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God even once. Yeah, not a single time. And that's kind of strange, right? A biblical story without God? That's one reason some scholars believe the story is more of a historical novella. Basically, a piece of Jewish national storytelling rather than an actual historical record. Then there's the issue of evidence. There are no Persian records of a Queen Esther. There's also no mention of Haman or this supposed mass genocide plan in any historical documents. And Xerxes I? We actually know a lot about his reign, and there's zero proof that any of this happened. If someone saved an entire ethnic group from genocide, you'd think we'd have at least one outside record of it, right? Some historians believe that the story of Esther was inspired by real events, but not necessarily factual. It may have been written to give Jewish people a sense of identity and hope, especially during times when they were ruled by foreign empires. And honestly, it worked. To this day, Jewish people celebrate Purim, a holiday based entirely on Esther's story, costumes, feasts, and all. So, was Esther a real person? Probably not. Was her story based on some real historical tensions between Jews and Persians? Maybe. But even if it's more of a legend than a biography, it's one of the most empowering stories in the Bible, proving that one person's courage can change everything. It's time to dive into one of the most famous stories in the Bible. You know, the guy who got swallowed by a giant fish and somehow lived to tell the tale? Yeah, we're talking about Jonah. So here's the thing. If you grew up hearing Bible stories, you probably remember Jonah as that guy who ran away from God, got tossed into the sea, and spent 3 days chilling inside a massive fish before getting spat back out. I mean, talk about a bad vacation. But was Jonah a real person? Or is this just one big metaphor? Let's break it down. The book of Jonah was written somewhere between 400 and 200 BCE, which is way after Jonah was supposedly alive. Now, one of the biggest red flags about this story is just how over the top it is, like surviving inside a giant fish for 3 whole days, without oxygen, without food, without getting dissolved by stomach acid. I mean, come on, even if the fish had a VIP lounge inside, the logistics just don't add up. And fun fact, back in ancient times, people weren't exactly marine biologists. The idea of a huge sea creature swallowing a man and keeping him safe sounds more like a legend than a historical event. Then we've got Nineveh, the city where Jonah was sent to preach. The book describes Nineveh as this impossibly massive place that takes 3 whole days to walk across. But here's the issue. Archaeologists have studied the real Nineveh, and it was nowhere near that big. That's like saying your local town is the size of New York City when, in reality, it's barely a few blocks. On top of that, the story claims that the entire city repented and turned to God instantly after hearing Jonah's message, like overnight. That's not really how people work. Imagine walking into a modern city, giving one speech, and suddenly millions of people drop everything and completely change their ways. Yeah, that doesn't sound too realistic. So, if all these details don't check out, what's the point of the story? Well, a lot of scholars think Jonah's tale wasn't meant to be taken as a literal historical event. Instead, it's more like a parable or a lesson about second chances, obedience, and how even people you don't like can be forgiven. You see, back in the day, the Israelites weren't exactly fans of the people of Nineveh. The Assyrians, who ruled Nineveh, were kind of like the big bad villains of that time. So the idea that God would send Jonah to preach to them, and even forgive them, was a pretty radical message. At the end of the day, there's no historical evidence that Jonah actually existed. No records of a guy getting swallowed by a fish and living to tell the tale. No proof that Nineveh suddenly became a holy city overnight. Alright, now let's go with the last one on the list. His name is Daniel. Now, Daniel is one of those biblical MVPs. The dude was supposedly living in Babylon around the 6th century BCE, hanging out in the king's palace, interpreting dreams, and even surviving a night in a den full of lions without a scratch. I mean, that's some serious main character energy. But here's the thing. Most scholars believe Daniel wasn't a real person. Yeah, like, at all. Turns out, the book of Daniel wasn't even written when Daniel was supposed to be alive. Instead, scholars say it was written around 165 BCE, which is like 400 years later. And you see, there are some major historical red flags in Daniel's story. First off, the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, is all wrong. The book makes him do things that we know from actual history he never did. It's like if someone wrote a history book saying Napoleon won World War II. Yeah, doesn't quite check out? Then there's the language. The book of Daniel uses a type of Aramaic that didn't even exist in the 6th century BCE. That's like writing a medieval knight's diary with modern slang. Yo, the battle was lit today. Just doesn't fit. But here's where it gets really interesting. The book makes these crazy accurate prophecies, like scarily specific, up until 165 BCE. And then, suddenly the predictions get super vague and kind of messy. Almost like the writer was just recording history up to their time and then started guessing. Suspicious, right? So, what's the deal? Well, a lot of scholars think Daniel is more of a symbolic figure rather than an actual historical person. The book was probably written to inspire Jewish people during tough times, specifically when they were being oppressed by the Greek ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Yeah, try saying that 5 times fast. But does that mean Daniel never existed? Well, we can't say for 100% sure. But based on the historical errors, language issues, and suspiciously accurate prophecies, let's just say the evidence is not in his favor. And with that, we've reached the end of our biblical detective work. Some of these characters might have been real people whose stories got exaggerated, some might be completely fictional, and some might be symbolic figures meant to teach deeper lessons. Either way, their stories have survived for thousands of years, making them some of the most legendary figures of all time. Well, that's a wrap. Until next time, take care.